Hi, it's Gary. Welcome to another moment in music. Today we're looking at an incredible piece of music by a band called Yes, and this was done in 1972, and the piece of music we're looking at runs at 18 minutes, is a piece called Close to the Edge. I remember listening to this after rehearsing and doing a bit of stuff with my own band many years ago, and all of us were looking at this going, how in the hell was this done? Bear in mind there's no digital technology here, and we've got to give great credit, I suppose, to Rick Wakeman to do the threading of the different pieces together, and also the producer they had at the time, a guy called Eddie Offord, who was literally cutting up pieces of tape and throwing out parts and putting others in and sticking things together. Anyway, that's a whole story in itself, I suppose. This was a landmark album, and it was regarded as, and I think it's still regarded as, one of the great prog pieces. Now, effectively the guys were, before this album, just leading up to it quickly, they were touring on the back of Fragile, which was their previous album, and they were touring in 1971. And what was happening, John Anderson and Steve Howe were actually, and they were two of the key members, they were actually putting ideas down on cassette, getting things ready. And John Anderson thought, look, I want to try and do something really long form. John was the visionary and the vocalist person. Steve Howe was the guitar player. Let's do something big. Have a look at what Jethro Tull are doing. I think they were doing Aqualung at that point. Thick as a Brick was about to come through. ELP were doing some things like, pictures at an exhibition and so forth. Everyone was going sort of long form and visionary and epic. So it was a little bit of a taste of what the guys were going to do in Yes. There was a little bit of a taste of this on Fragile, where they did a piece called Heart of the Sunrise, 11 minutes. All right, let's get to the chase here. I suppose the compositional approach here tied in with this major moment here, and I suppose it was John Anderson's vision, but it was, as I said before, it was also Rick Wakeman's capacity to grab all these little cassette ideas and start threading them together. I've got one piece here that's at one tempo, I've got another piece here that's at a slower tempo on a different key, and they'd consult Rick, how can we actually get these together? And they managed to do this. Now, at the same time this was going on, John Anderson had a major couple of influences going on. He was very influenced by the song structure, I suppose musical piece structure, coming out of pieces by a composer called Sibelius. He was a Finnish composer, and he had a 1915 piece, I think it was the Fifth Symphony. John really liked the structure of it, part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, whatever. So much so that that's how Close to the Edge was structured. A second key influence on all of this was music done by a woman called Wendy Carlos, and she'd done an album called Sonic Seasonings. And this was all about natural sounds, and I think she was possibly getting recordings out on the field and using them within her compositions. Another thing that John Anderson was looking at around this point was a book by a guy called Hermann Hesse, which was called Siddhartha. It was regarded as a bit of a counterculture manual, and it was all about nature and balance and water and trees and so forth. And this informed John's opinions and the way things were going, and he got very fascinated with the water and the river thing. Steve Howe lived by the river at around this time near the Thames, and this worked its way into some of the lyrics, down at the edge, down by the river, down at the edge, down by the river, these sorts of lyric ideas. So that's basically how the piece came together. As I said, Eddie Offord, the producer, he was just full on, and if you've ever seen any pictures of what the guys were doing, they were all at the mixing console, all working at once. And this was all facilitated by Eddie Offord, the producer. And so you had this incredible structure that ran for 18 minutes. And it started off with sampling of insects and bugs and nature and all that sort of thing, and water. And then it moved into something a little more formidable, a little bit more frantic. Steve Howe was sort of a bit of a nod to Mahavishnu Orchestra here. He was very big on Mahavishnu, and so it was quite frantic. It settled down. Part two was a little bit more song structure oriented. My favourite part on the piece was the third part, which was called I Get Up, I Get Down, and that was sort of a little bit ambient in some ways, I suppose. And it involved a bit of church organ pipes playing by Rick, and it also involved a bit of Moog playing before the whole piece went into section 4 and folded out into a massive finish with featuring Bill Bruford on drums, Chris Squire on bass, and really playing it out right to the finish as such. So an extraordinary piece of music, and one that is certainly worth checking out. Rick Wakeman recently remarked upon listening to this in the car as he was driving around London, had to get off the road, and then I think he said to himself, how in the fuck did we do that? So a very, very interesting piece of music, and one that's certainly worth checking out, Close to the Edge.